Let's fast forward back into, well, not the present, where Sykes and Picot are drawing with their crayon on a handkerchief. So tell us more specifics about the borders they decided to create and why they did it in that way.
Okay, so there's a couple of things going on. One of them is oil. They know there's oil there. You got to remember that the British Empire is a naval empire. Everything is based on ships. So if you're going to have oil-powered ships and you don't have access to oil, your empire's finished. So they're freaking out when Royal Dutch buys Shell. There was really only one other major oil corporation on the planet at the time, and it was Standard Oil, and that of course belonged to the United States. And so basically there were these two big oil companies, and the British didn't own either one of them. Now, having said that, the British had a great relationship with the Netherlands, and the British had a great relationship with the United States. So it wasn't like they were owned by two rival states. It wasn't like it was France and Germany that owned the oil companies. It's just that the British were concerned, what if something down the road changes or shifts? There's a bad election in the United States, or the Dutch decide they're more German and they want to go that direction. And so the British decide they have to have their own oil resource. So the, you know, the way you looked for oil back then was you walked staring at the ground, and you were hoping to find like black shale or black sandstone, a porous rock that acts like a sponge, because if it's sitting on top of an oil field, it'll literally suck the oil into it and turn black. Or because there was so much oil on the planet at the time, you could literally step in a puddle of oil, and then that would be a big indication that there was oil. Um, when the United States found oil in Pennsylvania, they found it at a place called Oil Creek. In other words, there was a really big hint there was probably oil there. And the reason the creek got named oil is the creek was cutting through the oil field, and then oil floats. So there was this sheen of oil on top of the creek. And they went, I bet there's oil here. Let's dig. So, right, that was how you found oil. You just mostly kept your eyes open. But the problem is the planet is huge. And so even though the British Empire owned a giant chunk of the planet, the idea of sending out armies of people to look at their feet and comb the whole planet to look for oil seemed daunting. So the British decided to do something really extraordinary: read history books and look for conversations about oil in the history books. And they found those conversations about oil in the Middle East. 1,000 years ago, the cities in the Middle East lit up their streets at night using oil, using petroleum. The Roman Empire had, in the 7th century and then again in the 8th century, were using flamethrowers, using petroleum to fight the Arabs. At one point, Arab armies carried around glass balls with a wick in it, and inside it was oil, and they would light them and throw them like little napalm hand grenades. Nathain, that was the name of the soldiers. So the British knew there was oil, they just didn't know where. And so they moved in, grabbed Kuwait. By this point, the British already had a presence in the Persian Gulf, the Arabian Gulf, and that was in the United Arab Emirates. They created the Trucial Coast. They had already established a relationship with Oman. So grabbing Kuwait was just taking a chunk of land away from the Ottoman Empire, and basically creating a base with the idea of looking for oil in southern Iraq or in Iran. They made a deal with the Persian government, and the deal was amazing. They got 86% concession. So normally when you make a deal like that, you get a 50-50, right? You're the British company, you're doing the work, but it's the Iranian oil, so they should get their share. 50-50 is pretty normal, but the Qajars, the rulers of Iran, were really, how should we say, into opium, eager to get that British opium more than they were eager to advance their country. And so the British got this really amazing concession from them. And that began to shape the way they thought about oil. I'm sorry, thought about the Middle East. Having said that, they found oil. I'm pretty sure the Anglo-Persian Oil Company found oil in like 1908. We should double check my date. So that shortly after they get the concession, they find it. Shortly after they find it in Iran, the Ottoman Empire finds it in what is today northern Iraq. And the British are eager to get a deal with the Ottoman Empire for that oil. But the Ottomans decide that Germany is their future. And so the Turks make a deal with the Germans. And of course, in that moment, the British are thinking, okay, the Ottoman Empire is, we have to destroy it. Germany can't have this oil. Germany can't have this kind of access to oil. And the reason is, quite simply, that they were worried that the German Navy was going to eventually eclipse the British Navy. And the British and the Germans were in an arms race. Every time the Germans built a ship, the British would build 2 ships. And that would force the Germans to build another ship to try to cancel the 2 ships the British just built, which would then force the British to build 2 new ships. And they were bankrupting each other. At the rate that they were building ships, it was inevitable that both economies were going to collapse. And that's one of the reasons why World War I had to happen. They had to just resolve the arms race one way or another. Somebody just simply had to come out on top. And of course, the British come out on top. There's nothing wrong or evil about what the Germans did any more than what the British or the French did in World War I. They're not the bad guys. They were all bad, right? It was just a bunch of evil states attacking each other. It's not like World War II where it's easy to sort of lay blame on the Germans. In any case, Sykes and Picot get together because they want to talk about what the future is, and that future will not include an Ottoman Empire. The British and the French had decided that they were simply going to take out the Ottoman Empire. It didn't hurt any that there's an Arab uprising, and the Arabs are actually in the act of defeating the Ottomans because they're trying to break away and create their own independent state. And so the British and the French, well, the British really, not the French, assist the Arab uprising, but not because they cared about Arab aspirations, but because an enemy of an enemy is a friend. And then their first goal, of course, was to undermine that Arab state, and they did. They successfully undermined it. That Arab state did exist briefly. Its capital was Damascus. It had a flag shockingly similar to the Jordanian and Palestinian flag. The stripes weren't the exact order, right? It wasn't black, white, green. It was, if I remember correctly, green, black, green, white, but almost the exact same flag. And that's where the Jordanians and the Palestinians got their flag. It was inspired by that first attempt at creating a united Arab state from Syria. In any case, Sykes and Picot, before that Arab state existed, before World War I is resolved, are sitting down and talking about how they're going to carve up the Middle East. When they made the plan, there was still a Russian Empire. So Greece, the Italian Empire, the Russian Empire, the British Empire, the French Empire were going to be the participants in this giant carve-up event. So one piece that needed to be carved up was the Ottoman Empire. They were going to leave a piece behind that was going to become Turkey, but they were going to give a big piece to Italy in the south, so Antalya area, that was going to go to Italy. In the west, Izmir was going to go to Greece. So the Greeks were going to have the western shore of what is today Turkey. And then the French were going to end up with Syria, Lebanon, and what is today Iraq. The English were only going to take what is today Palestine, Israel, and Jordan. And the reason why the British were okay with that is then the French would get the oil that was in Iraq because the British were planning to get the oil that was in Iran. The Russian Empire was going to invade Iran, take the northern half of Iran, and the British Empire was going to invade and take the southern half, and that would get them access to oil that they could feel secure with. The Russians, though, during World War I, decide they're going to go communist, have the Bolshevik Revolution, and declare that they no longer have imperialist aspirations and that they won't work with capitalists anymore. And the British Empire realizes if there's no Russia to invade Iran from the north, there's no way the British can manage Iran by themselves. They need to divide and conquer. They can't do it just conquering. So the British backstab the French and take Iraq. And they're like, we're sorry, but we need to secure our oil fields. You guys just have to figure it out on your own.
Why do the French just agree to that?
The French were in such awful shape at the end of World War I. The British Empire was the hegemonic superpower. France was in the number 2 slot. I think that at that point, the French were just grateful that the British were willing to even cut them in because the French had nothing to do with the destruction of the Ottoman Empire. It was the Arab uprising. The British did do the invasion at Gallipoli, but that also didn't, right? The Turks won at Gallipoli. It's okay, though, because the British were using Australians, and nobody loves Australians. So, they're it's amazing that the British are like that, but they are. It's really amazing. In any case, I think the French were just happy to have anything at that point. They were grateful. Also, they will figure out eventually it's too late for them, but there is oil in northern Syria. It was nothing like what was in Iraq. So they were probably hoping that they'd find something.
Okay, and what happens with Egypt and Saudi Arabia?
Okay, so um, Egypt had a different trajectory. In 1798, Napoleon Bonaparte invades Egypt. And after securing Egypt, he actually invaded Palestine. And his goal was to move the Jewish population out of France to Palestine. He wanted to ethnically cleanse the Jewish population from Europe. And people see it as, oh, he loved the Jewish people. Well, if he loved them so much, why didn't he want them to stay in France? He clearly didn't love them as much as I think some people think. In any case, Napoleon is defeated. The British sink his navy. They catch his navy in a bay and sink it, and it's a disaster. And the French have to escape Egypt. And Napoleon was thinking he was going to basically march to China. He was going to start this new massive empire with Egypt as his base of operations, and the British ruin it for him. So he decides, okay, I'll just conquer Europe. So he retreats back to France. What that did, though, was it inspired somebody. So there was an Albanian general who was part of the Ottoman army. His name was Mehmet Ali or Muhammad Ali, depending on whether you're an Arab or a Turk. He was an Albanian, so I guess we should ask the Albanians what they say. He goes, wow, what Napoleon did was actually really cool. I bet I could do something like that myself. He takes his Ottoman army that he's in command of, he invades Crete, takes it over, and then waits for the Ottoman Empire to respond. It doesn't. And then he's like, well, let's go. And he invades Egypt, conquers Egypt, and then he takes his army into Palestine, goes up through Syria, and he actually invades what is today Turkey before the Ottoman Empire goes, whoa, what are you doing? Please stop. Right? He's just an Ottoman general who goes rogue. He didn't speak any Arabic. He knew Turkish and Albanian. His soldiers mostly speak Turkish and Albanian. This is such an odd thing to be doing, but this is what he does. He's a visionary and he thinks in grand terms. He negotiates out a deal with the Ottoman Empire where he'll give back a bunch of Syria and Turkey. In exchange, he'll become basically the governor of an autonomous Egypt. And he starts a whole dynasty of kings of Egypt they didn't take the title initially, but it's effectively what they became, who are going to be the governors of a semi-autonomous Egypt. To mix the two histories, the Saudi family had actually created a state. So if you look it up, it's the first Saudi state in the 1700s. That Saudi state lasted something like 80 years. What happened was their capital was Diriyah, which is right next to Riyadh. In 1818, the Ottoman Empire was really upset with this first Saudi state because it had become quite large. It conquered what is today the UAE. It had Bahrain. It had essentially all of what is today Saudi Arabia. And that was at the expense, to some degree, of the Ottoman Empire. Not all of that land was Ottoman territory, but a bunch of it was. And so the Ottoman Empire asked Mehmed Ali basically for a favor. And they said, technically you're part of the empire. Can you go put down this Saudi state? And he does. He takes an army into the first Saudi state. He goes to Diriyah. He destroys Diriyah, and the first Saudi state is terminated. It doesn't stick. I think it was 6 years later, 1824. That's the year in my head. A second Saudi state is formed. That second Saudi state will eventually also fail. And then a third Saudi state is formed out of Najd. Its idea is it wants to recreate the first Saudi state, this big, almost the entire Arabian Peninsula size state. But when we were talking earlier, I was telling you about the fact that there was this attempt to create this Arab state in Syria. When that Arab state was being created, it was created by Hijazis. So people who were living in Western Saudi Arabia. It was a Hashemite kingdom. The British go to the Sauds and they say, we're going to undermine and destroy this Hashemite state, but it would be helpful if you did as well. Now, the Sauds don't react to that. They're not directly responsive to the British, but eventually they do. And they'll go and they'll conquer Hejaz. They'll put it together and they create the third Saudi state. As a result, the British and the Saudi royal family had a cordial relationship. The British saw the Sauds as somebody they could work with, somebody that maybe that they had enough in common with, that they didn't feel like they were a threat. In the case of Egypt, the British did something really strange. So the French built the Suez Canal, but when the French built the Suez Canal, they charged Egypt for it. Now you go, okay, well, they built it. Well, let me rephrase that. A French company went to Egypt and then hired Egyptian laborers at way under labor value prices, and then had them almost as slaves dig the Suez Canal with high mortality rates, and then charge the Egyptian government for them. And at some level, you go, really? This is just another little imperialist scheme. Well, to do this, the Egyptian state had to borrow money from banks. So that's what they did. Well, in 1882, the British government decided that they were going to use the debt Egypt owed it as an excuse to invade. They invaded and conquered Egypt. There was actually a whole defense force set up in Alexandria to try and stop a possible European invasion. The defense force fails, and the British take over Egypt, and they make it a protectorate inside the empire, and they eventually force the Khedive out of power, but then they replace him with a king, and so Egypt becomes an independent kingdom from the Ottoman Empire at that point.